I keep trying to figure out, how do I get these clients to be really excited about the numbers? Because they weren't.
Welcome back, you guys. We are here on episode 107, and I want to talk to you about this guest. Okay, so she has this really beautiful, like one pager, like a little bio that has really great stats about her and her business and who she helps, and a couple core little marketing messages. And when I read a couple of these, I was sold because this is how I feel as well. And I'll explain why in a second. But so she says that basically you want to use metrics, not manifesting. Embrace your profit growth as well, and stay away from that sort of bro culture, hustle culture. So a few of those things was like, yes. Reason why I really like this about her, and I'll tell you more about her in a second, is that I do feel like when we are at a certain stage in growing our businesses, numbers is everything. Numbers and also sustaining ourselves with our health and wellness. So when I read this about her, I thought this is the perfect time to bring her on because I know most of you guys are in that growth scale phase of your business. So, Melanie Miller is who is joining us. She is the founder of The Profit Lovers. She's basically a business growth strategist and a fractional CEO. And she has the coolest tips for you guys coming up around what to do and what not to do in your business, around thinking differently around your numbers. I mean, you've heard this as a theme in this episodes or my podcast. Numbers, know your numbers, right? She has a little bit of a different slant on it. And especially stay tuned to her point number 3, which she says to not worry about your expenses. We have a great chat coming up. I can't wait to introduce her to you. You guys ready? Let's welcome Melanie onto the show. Melanie, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am well. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh. Okay, you guys, when I came across Melanie, there's some of her messages that absolutely spoke to me. Sort of anti-hustle culture naturally, that's what we stand for, but also anti sort of bro marketing, which I talk about a lot. And also something you said, Melanie, I love, I just said to you before this, was using metrics, not manifesting. There's so much we're going to talk about, so many different cool angles we're going to take this in. But before we even go into all those things and what you do in your business, guys, I like to start with the tangible takeaways. So we're going to ask Melanie, what are 3 things that you do when you're growing your business to stay away from that hustle culture and really ground yourself in your growth?
Number 1 is, I always know what makes profit, what generates profit. So
Nice.
I'm not distracted by a million different things that are going on. There are so many shiny objects or opportunities to chase. So I'm always very profit focused. Obviously, it's in the name, the Profit Lovers. I do apply to my own business. I know with any project, out of every dollar in revenue, how much of that I get to keep in profit. So I am very much invested in knowing those numbers. Because of that, I do tend to say no a lot, which then enables me to be quite focused on the things that are profitable and enjoyable. Not everything I do is super profitable. And I don't think everybody needs to focus only on the profitable. You've got to have some enjoyment in there as well. I've got a project that I'm working on at the moment that is more creative. I've got a project where I'm not going to see a payoff for quite some time, but they're hugely enjoyable. So although I'm hoping there will be a long-term profit outcome, they're also hugely enjoyable and they make me a better business strategist. So I always know where's my profit coming from.
Yeah.
I consume, sorry, go for it.
Which we're going to definitely dive into for sure more.
Yeah.
I'm going to have good questions for that coming up. So but keep going. What else?
That's my love language, Heather. I consume very little content. Very little. And I also put out very little content. So I know that most people have their or their different opt-ins on their website, and they're on all these different platforms and sharing all of this information. I really don't want to be somebody who pushes a whole lot of content out into the world. One, it's just not really my nature to create amazing, great content. It's not a skill I have. I want whatever content I do put out there to be really impactful, because the amount of content overwhelm. So I'm very cautious about what I consume. I very much filter. I have maybe one or two subscription emails that come into my inbox. And other than that, I consume very, very little. I like listening to podcasts. I'm not a huge course taker. I'm not a huge consumer outside of that. That keeps you super focused.
Yeah.
And the other thing is I never worry about my expenses, which I'm sure you will ask me about, because it's a bit of an odd one. I never dive deeply into my expenses. And generally the clients I work with are on the conservative side when it comes to expenses. It's very rare. I couldn't actually remember a time I've looked at a client's financials and said, oh my gosh, you're spending way too much. Generally, they're spending way too little. So for me personally, I'm not looking at my expenses because I am more on the conservative side. I never am going wild with expenses. I know my numbers in and out. I know I'm profitable, and you can only ever push your expenses down to zero, right? Whereas if you focus on the revenue, that is an unlimited number.
Nice. Okay. So let's ask some questions around those things, because I'd like to know a little bit more. First things first, you focus on what generates profit. And how much you keep in the end. If somebody were wanting to change their sort of mindset or their structure in their business to do the same thing, where would they start to focus on profit?
Very, very good question. You start by knowing what your profit goal is and matching your profit goal to what you personally need. There seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what somebody thinks that their sales goal should be, and a sales goal can be quite vanity driven, but it's fairly well irrelevant. The sales goal has to obviously help you reach a profit goal. Your profit goal then has to help feed into your personal goals. What are your retirement plans? You're putting away for your superannuation. We know that women retire with around 40% of the super that men do. We know that the fastest growing group or demographic of homelessness in Australia is women of retirement age, which I find really frightening. We're in this time, like right now, in this very, very moment when so much of the language around money, so much of the messaging is very, very negative. This is the time to say, you know what, I'm going to go and dig into my numbers. I'm going to figure out what it's going to take for me to start looking at what my retirement should be. What should my superannuation look like? Have I got enough in insurances in case there is a rainy day? I need to protect myself. If I need X amount coming into my personal bank account every single year, how much do I need to create in profit for that to be possible? And then you work that number backwards into a sales goal. Whereas generally you'll find people aim for the sales goal first, and then they wait and see what falls out the bottom. And I have heard accountants tell clients that they will only know if they've made a profit or not when the accountant does the end of year taxes. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. You need to be focused on that profit number. Profit numbers should have a purpose in your life. Otherwise, it is just profit for profit's sake. Most people aren't particularly driven by that. If I can get clients thinking more along those lines too, then I can get them, my clients are female, all female. So getting them to fall in love with the idea of creating profit without them feeling super guilty about it, or like it's a little bit shameful, or I shouldn't really talk about it, or, I'm charging people and they're having to pay me and maybe they're struggling. All of that really toxic messaging that women receive around money. if I can connect their profit goal to their personal goals, and those personal goals are around personal financial security, future safety, building a nest egg, ensuring that there's, generational wealth, then I get them to connect. And that for me was quite a big missing factor in my approach for the first probably 5 or 6 years, if I'm honest. I keep trying to figure out, how do I get these clients to be really excited about the
Hmm.
numbers? Because they weren't. When you start talking about what can be achieved personally, and because women do tend to worry about how they're looking after everybody around them, it something changes, something shifts.
I love that.
So you want to start with what it is you personally need, and go and look at your superannuation balance. Go and look at your mortgage, go and look at your credit card balances, whatever debt you're holding, and figure out what you need personally, and then use your business to fuel what you need personally. That's the most exciting thing about being self employed. You go and work for an employer, and I know we've all been there, I certainly was, and an employer says you are worth X amount to me. And if you overperform for years and years, but everybody else in the company underperforms, or you overperform for years and years, but I, as a CEO or the CFO, underperforms and miscalculates, it doesn't matter that you're a valuable asset. You're not worth any more to
Yeah.
us, right? If I'm the best performer in a company and the rest of the company's done terribly, and I front up and say, it's time for you to give me a pay rise, they'll say, the company can't afford it. Well, hang on. I'm giving you everything. I'm performing. So, in that respect, being self employed, you get to set those numbers and you get to work toward those numbers. Now, that was an
Of course.
oversimplification by saying you get to set those numbers and you can work towards those numbers, because you've got to have a business model that's going to allow you to hit those numbers, right? This is all part of this profit planning. It's about understanding how much of every $1 you received you actually get to keep. Think about it as that very basic pie chart that we were all forced to work with in school, primary school. There is a slice of that pie chart that belongs to you. There's a slice that belongs to the tax department. There's a slice that's going to go to expenses. There's all of these slices. Figure out how much of that belongs to you and whether that's enough for you to fund the life that you need or are trying to create. And if those numbers don't match, or those numbers aren't going to work together, then you've got a business model issue that you can then work on solving. It is just really puzzle pieces, yeah.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and really well explained actually on that point as well. And one thing you said around that was saying no to more things. That's a very common theme in everyone I interview, is the no factor. So I love that you wove that in there. The
I'm
idea of not consuming a lot of content as well. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah, I'm exceptionally good at the no. It's an odd
Yeah.
thing to be proud of, but the no is very easy for me, and I don't feel like I've got to give it with a whole lot of explanation either. But there are a lot of things. I don't do any of
No,
those
it's good.
online summit participation. I don't want to speak
Yeah.
anymore. I've been there, I've done that. It's not fun for me. So, really saying yes to the things that are quite exciting and saying no to everything else and not feeling at all guilty about it. I am super protective of my time and energy. I was having a conversation with a client yesterday about people who, friends, colleagues, anybody who might call you and say, hey, do you want to catch up for lunch on Friday? And for me, it's always a no, not because I don't have good work life balance or I can't if I want to. It's because of the time it takes out of my day. It isn't just an hour or two to pop out and have lunch. Because of the way my brain works, it's the 2 to 3 hours that I waste before we go for lunch, not wanting to start anything because my brain just doesn't work that way. It needs to compartmentalize. And then it's the couple of hours that I'm going to waste after I come home from lunch because I'm never going to sit back down at my computer. So I'm quite protective of my time.
Yeah.
So that's saying no, super important.
Yeah. Excellent. And then before we get to know a little bit more about you and how you work, I am going to ask you the question, of course, about don't worry about expenses. Your third tip. Okay.
Yeah.
Why? You said focus
So,
on revenue, of course, but
yeah.
what? Like, what's the deal?
So here's the deal. I have spent so many years trying to force cash flow forecasting down the throats of my clients, and they have been rightfully so very, very, very resistant to that. That kind of in-depth knowledge of numbers doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, and it's not necessarily useful in the huge amount of detail that an accountant would maybe want to see. I have a slightly different role outside of the profit lovers within a business, a rapidly growing startup. And in that role, my eyes are fixed on those expenses because I'm trying to understand how money flows through the business. I also am trying to fund a rapidly growing business, right? And we are rapidly growing businesses. Anyone who says, I want $1 million business and I want it in the next year, or any of those coaches or courses that pitch that, you do not want that. Rapidly growing businesses burn cash like nothing else. They are so hard to sustain. And so with this business, because I am making sure that we have the cash flow to sustain the growth, I am very, very conscious of those numbers. But once again, I'm not trying to push those numbers down. I'm trying to ensure that we're understanding where those numbers feed the business and what we do or don't need and how those numbers are impacting outcomes. It's more about looking for patterns than it is about what the actual numbers are. Whereas when you think about a conversation that you might have with your accountant, they'll run your profit and loss report and then they'll just go line by line by line through your expenses. And often their suggestions are to cut things that are imperative to your business. Yeah. So when I say I don't pay attention to expenses, I do not run a P&L and go line by line by line through every expense. I'm just not interested in doing that. Not for myself, not for my clients. What we look at are just percentages. So on a month by month basis, if we have 100,000 coming in, what percentage would we assume we would have going out to cost of goods, cost of sales, cost of delivery, whatever you want to call that? And then what do we have going into expenses? And if those numbers aren't hugely variant from what I would expect, I'm moving on, because let's just keep this thing going. We've got so much to do already in business. We don't need to be worrying about the things we don't need to be worried about. The over emphasis on looking at those expenses then does get you into this mindset of, wow, maybe I am spending too much and maybe I do need to cut here and cut there and cut here and cut there. Say you shave 10 to 15% off your expenses. That's great. You'll get a little boost in profit. Is it really going to help you reach your goals in 3 years? Probably isn't going to make a huge difference. I'll give you a really specific example of that. My hairdresser will murder me if he listens to this, but we have freaked out conversations about, business, and, he's literally blow drying and cutting and, brain dumping. And he will often say to me, I need to fire the bookkeeper. She's costing me X amount per month. I need to reduce this. I need to fire that. And I'm always saying to him, John, stop. Do not do those things, because they're going to create extra workload on you. They're going to take away your ability to see what's going on in your business clearly. They're a normal business expense, and it's not going to help you make more money in the long term. And it won't. You want to invest your time instead of going through, dollar by dollar and trying to, claw back whatever you can. Instead of doing that, spend that time looking at the data that drives your business and looking at how you can impact that data. That's a better use of your time. I worked with a client. It was such a scary time. It was, unfortunately, they launched a business with a huge investment, huge overheads in November 2019. Was 2020 the year of the
Right.
pandemic? It's like a
Of the
complete,
COVIDs, yes.
my memory is just shut down when it comes to that time period. It was, 3 or 4 months of trading essentially before shutdowns hit. And they made it through that period, started to get some really good momentum, and then the investors said, "Oh, now we've made it through. We want to see some money back." So of course they go off to the accountant, and the accountant cuts their ad spend in half. The ad spend was driving the revenue. So be careful, pay attention, know what your expenses are. I'm not saying just completely forget that expenses exist. Know what they are. If I've got a business that's quite large and we've got big expenses and quite tight margins, if you're in a business with margins that are, say, net profit margins of, say, less than 15%, you're in a very tight margin business. And so your expenses, you want to make sure that you're understanding what your percentages are. In those businesses, I'll separate out the top 4 or 5 expenses, and then I'll just bunch everything else together so that we're seeing that the staff wages, those bigger expenses, we're understanding what they are and ensuring they're not fluctuating too much. And the rest of it, as long as it doesn't go over a certain percentage, we're not looking at it. So even in those bigger businesses, there is a way to cash flow forecast where you identify your cash drivers, your revenue drivers, and you just pull those out. With some businesses I work with, I am pulling those numbers out and assigning a percentage to them to encourage my clients to spend more, not less, because within your expenses, you can identify the things that drive growth. Having coaches and consultants drives growth, having contractors, having staff drives growth, your outsourcing drives growth, your ad spend, your marketing spend. And so it can be really interesting to sit down with a P&L, if you really want to go through it line by line, and just highlight how many of your expenses directly relate to driving the growth in your business. That might encourage you to worry less about all of the other expenses and pushing them down, and more about maybe reallocating some of that money to marketing, outsourcing the things that do drive a business.
These are amazing tips, and thank you so much for expanding on them. And now I'm sure people are saying, yeah, you know your stuff, Melanie. So how do you work with clients? Well, give me a case study. Give me an example. What happens when you work with someone?
Yes. So when I work with somebody, the first thing we start with is an overall 90-minute review of everything that's going on in their business. I have a linear pathway that can be applied to any business, any industry, which starts with visibility. Then it moves on to your lead creation. From lead creation, we go on to sales conversion.
Yep.
From sales conversion, products, offers, the delivery of whatever it is that you sell. When you look at a business in those very linear terms, we go from one point, basically from the start to the end, and figure out what is happening at all of those places. So in terms of visibility, what drives our visibility? Do we know? Most people will say, haven't got a clue. Great. We need to figure that out as we're working together. What drives our lead creation? Most people have got maybe 1 or 2 lead sources. My next question will be, what are our metrics? What are our data? What collects our data? What reports our data? Who's responsible for our data? And we go through that process throughout those linear milestones or linear stepping stones throughout the process. And then we'll go through a risk reduction, what is potentially going to derail us. And that is things like your insurances. It's where we get quite boring in terms and conditions. And then we obviously want to make sure that we've got a really good, solid profit strategy. So understanding what this business needs to create. So we've got a really good, solid starting point, which means that if a client, and naturally within coaching or business strategy relationships, you get to a point where your client becomes quite overwhelmed, or the business starts to shift and change and they mentally need to catch up with that, right? Or they just need to find their feet a little bit. With that kind of approach where I know where they're sitting, they can come back to me at any time and we just keep moving forward. So that's
Yep.
the initial sort of starting phase. And then every time
Okay.
we meet with a very specific objective. We are addressing this in order. I go through that big review document and I look at our opportunities. I look at what we can do quickly, what we can do easily, what we can do without a huge investment of resources. What can we tick off the list? Because that's going to get the client momentum, right? And that's super important. And it's going to help them feel good and confident. And then we tackle, basically priority list of how we're going to tackle it. That's probably the biggest benefit to working with a strategist or a coach is having somebody sit with you and figure out how you approach this. Where are the priorities? It is so hard when you're in a business to know what the priorities are. You're so entrenched in it. It's so
Oh,
hard
yeah.
to look at it from that, distant view.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you are working with somebody, because you're big on profit and knowing the numbers, is that how you see opportunities for your clients? Do you actually look at the numbers and then that's where you
Yeah.
guide them from there?
I start obviously with all their financial reports. It isn't always the
Yeah.
thing that we chase necessarily first, though. There may be a friction point. So along that linear progression, there may be some very big friction points
Yep.
where there isn't really any purpose in me chasing increased revenue, for instance, if that friction point exists, because all I'm going to do is burden that business owner down the line. If we've got things like that happening, we need to sort those out first. And that can be team members that maybe aren't participating the way we need them to be. It can be slightly out of sync offers that maybe are quite profitable and we could just amp them up, but actually, is it going to fulfill a need in 3 years? When I'm working with clients, I'm always asking them to think about what they want in 3 to 5 years. No one can ever tell me, and that's okay. But because I've already planted that seed, we're thinking about that. So we might have an amazing opportunity in front of us to increase revenue considerably. But if I know that we're going to have a negative consequence in 2 to 3 years by doing that, we're going to work it all around so it's a better approach. That might be, I worked with a client who had I want to be careful about how much detail I give away, who had a
Of course.
professional services offer and was given this incredible opportunity. But the incredible opportunity was very kind of personal brand driven, right? So it would have been her personally, not the
Okay.
business, that would have been in the limelight. Had we have done that, she would have had to have taken her eyes off the saleable asset that was the business she was growing, the professional service business she was growing.
Yep.
So in that moment, it would have been super fun. I would have been able to throw her all over my website and been so excited about that. It would have done damage to what she could do. When she was ready to sell, she did sell. She got an amazing, amazing outcome. And you've just got to be willing to say, once again, it's willing to say no.
How long do you tend to work with your clients on average?
I have a very odd number for average. So I do try and talk more in, say, the median, because the averages can
Yeah.
seem exceptionally high. Most of the clients that I'm working with right now have been with me for at least 7 years. So you can imagine how that's it sounds super impressive. It really skews the numbers. And before we started talking, I said to you, the things that I'm really good at in business are really terrible to market. Like they're really unsexy. And my obsession with numbers, my talking about I'm already like downplaying it, right? I don't want to put that on my website because it's overinflated because it's an average, it's not a median. So they usually will stay with me for 7, 8 years, and they cycle in and out. So I have clients that I'm working with. We are on a second or a third business. the first business has been sold or it has evolved or changed in some way. And we will work consistently for, say, a year and 6 months. And then I find that they'll take sort of 3 to 4 months off. Or I will say to them, I need you to go and run with this. And then they'll come back and we just keep this cycle going, which is both a blessing and a curse because I'm the world's laziest marketer because people come back and then I can be very, very, very lazy when it comes to marketing.
But you have an amazing track record. I mean, that's why I asked that question. I had this feeling that people would stick around with you for a while because if you're good at what you do in the space of growing businesses and profit, then why would they leave? Because their business is growing. So it makes
Yeah.
sense that they'd be there for a long time. We're going to start to make a move to wrap up. And before we do that, two things. The first thing is, who is your ideal client and how do they work with you? I know you said, no, I'm not good at marketing, but here's an opportunity. Tell us about yourself. Who's your ideal
Oh
client?
my
How
Lord,
can
I
they work
don't
with you?
like it, Heather. I work with business owners, female business owners that generally have a
Yes.
small team. So 3 to 4 people on their team. They don't need to be employees. I'm not a big believer in the every business owner needs to build employees, not external help, because you can't build culture unless you have them as employees. I have quite a few clients who prove that very wrong. So as long as you've got some support in the business and you're cash flow positive, in terms of
Yeah.
where you are in the world, irrelevant. I've got clients in the US, UK, I've had them all over the place, Israel, I've had them everywhere. And industry
Wow.
is a little bit irrelevant. As long as I feel like I can digest the numbers enough or have enough of an understanding of how the numbers all influence each other, that I'm going to be able to give you good advice. I had once a chicken farmer and I did an organic chicken
Wow.
farming. Yeah, super. And I was so interested in this. It was so exciting. But I had to say to her, I'm not the right fit
Yeah.
for you because I know nothing about chicken life. I don't know how do you know how to put these together, right? Because I don't know, like, do the chickens age out? I don't know. So I wasn't confident in that approach. So, in terms of industry, it doesn't really matter. It's more about where you're at and having that cash flow positive business, being willing to invest in those next steps. And I am not a hand holder. I have moved away from using coach at all in the language that I use because I am a terrible coach. I'm a great strategy mind. I'm a great maths mind. I'm an
Yeah.
awful coach because I don't have that great ability to hold hands through. And I think good coaches do have that, right? Good coaches are nurturing. I am by nature
Mm.
quite blunt, if you hadn't picked up on it, quite blunt. And
I
that's
love
not
it. Yep.
necessarily a great skill in a coach, right? So if you're looking for
Hmm.
motivation in that respect, if you're looking for someone to really work with you on your mindset, no, I don't work with startups either. And I don't work with
Yep.
partnerships
Yep.
anymore. I was listening to Emma McQueen's interview on your podcast, and she made a comment about partnerships, and Emma and I are very aligned. I don't work with partnerships anymore. You can pop
I
on
don't
over
have
to
a
the
partner in my
referral.
business. I
No,
get that. Yeah.
I'm not. Interestingly, I actually am putting in some pretty big sweat equity into a growing startup. This is a client of mine that I had worked with for 7 or 8 years through multiple different businesses. And this business in particular has taken off, and it's been really frustrating to get the help and support she needed into this business. And so I've gone in with her, but I am not her business partner. I am offering a strategic guidance, a profit share arrangement. I am not her business partner, nor will we ever be business partners. I like to exit if I need to, and I want her to be able to do the same.
So smart. And I cannot tell you how many partnerships that I've seen over the years in my social circles as well just dissolve and have a lot of issues. So I'm definitely behind you on that. So where do people go to learn more about you?
Theprofitlovers.com is my online home. So you will find everything you need to know there, links to anything that's exciting that's happening. I don't have any kind of free offer or opt in. Usually I do, but I haven't for the last sort of 6 to 12 months, purely because I am so focused on making sure that I am not giving people more content, that I'm really thinking about what that next thing is going to look like. If ever there is something exciting,
Yeah.
you will find it right on the website anyway.
Excellent. And as we wrap up, is there anything, any words of wisdom or anything that's come to you in this conversation where you feel that the listeners really need to know about it?
Oh gosh. All right. I would say consume less content and do more things. Put more things to the test. You will never get ahead by just continually
Ah,
consuming content, and don't fix or try and solve problems that don't exist yet, particularly by consuming more content. It's so very, I literally just sent a text message to a client of mine who asked if she should join something. And in a very blunt way, she's been told no. It's so enticing to see all of these great offers, these beautifully marketed, coaches, courses, whatever it might be. If that's not a problem you have right now, don't invest in fixing it. Don't even invest in it if you think it might be a problem. Use the data in your business to verify it is a problem, and don't consume that much content that is going to take you away from actually doing the things that will provide the data for you to then respond to. Melanie's harsh last words of wisdom.
that was the best way. No, those are brilliant last words. You're very much aligned with how I think and what I say to people as well. So that, yes, thank you. Really beautiful way to end that. You guys, look, if you feel like you're resonating with Melanie and who she is, and you're right there as her target market, reach out to her. Don't consume any content. Just go to her website and contact her.
I
But
don't need to
outside of
stop the
that,
technical chain
thank
moving.
you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Heather. Thank you for having me.
Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.